We are recording this session, so if you're not able to attend for the full 2 hours, this will be posted after the program and you'll have access to it. But thank you for joining us. Hopefully you can all hear me loud and clear. I'm coming in from our Albany office here, the SUNY Sale Institute, and I'm joined by my colleague, Dr. Scott Vinciguerra from our SUNY Center for Professional Development office in Syracuse, New York. So I'm going to turn it over to the RF folks to see if they have any housekeeping items they'd like us to open up with. But after they say a few words, I will walk you through how to test your technology and make sure that you're prepared to engage with us over the next 2 hours, because we will have some questions for you and we will like to talk to you and have you use some of the features in Zoom. So Jamie or Kathleen, is there anything from your end?
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, good. Welcome, Scott. Thank you so much for providing us with this wonderful training. So first off, I'd like to thank you and Carolyn. And secondly, we've received quite a few questions about the symposium, which I'm happy about. I would like to just say one thing, if you don't mind, Carolyn, just since we're together, which is that we of course want the RAVA participants to register for the symposium. There are some slots available. Questions have come in about whether or not we pay for travel for 2 nights, meaning hotel for 2 nights. If you live and work within a 2 hour and 15-minute area, no, we're not able to pay for that particular night coming in, because the actual symposium starts at 10 a.m. So we hope to get on the road early. And we look forward to seeing everybody. We do have a time where the entire RAVA group will get together, and we had thought maybe we'll do some public speaking. I'm not sure if we're going to have time for it, but we do have a period of time set aside to actually meet together. So more to come on that, but I just wanted to mention it. And either one of you have anything to add? Jamie or Jenna? No? Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Great. Great. Well, thank you all for joining us. Looks like we have a larger than usual crowd, which is wonderful, and hopefully you'll share this recording with your colleagues. If this is your first time on a Zoom meeting, it's very simple, and we try to keep it as engaging as possible, so you'll see that we have our webcam turned on, and if you have one, please turn yours on as well. I've got up on the screen here some steps on how to test your microphone and your speakers. So just in the lower left corner of your screen, you'll see where to click. Excuse me. Okay, so you'll want to click on the audio options button, and from there you can use the very easy buttons to test both of those functions, the speakers and the microphone. So you will have the ability to talk with us throughout the program, so we will keep you muted most of the time just so we're eliminating any feedback or background noise, and we keep our focus on our presenter. But if you'd like to speak, please, by all means, you can either raise your hand or just send me a message in the chat, and I'm happy to unmute you and we can take your question verbally. Or we'll be monitoring the chat feature throughout the program, so send us your questions typed in the chat feature. And that's no problem at all. Let's see, so very easy to use Zoom, and you'll see you can either type a private message to the full group, or you can send something to me or to someone else personally. So if you have any questions, let me know, either about the content or about the functionality. Oh, and there is a question for the RF folks. So is the symposium only covered for 1 night for RAVA participants, and do others have to pay?
Indeed, we are able to cover 1 night unless you're traveling from the New York City metro area or Buffalo and Rochester area. Everything else, the catchment area, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, we're covering 1 night for the hotel. Other folks that are further out, 2 nights.
And Kathleen, they might be also asking for their colleagues that aren't a part of RAVA.
the same benefits are extended to them.
Yes, as Jenna said, right, that goes for everybody who's attending the symposium. Thank you.
Great. And I realize the screen is black, but we're going to turn it over to Scott so he can share his slides, and you'll be able to see our program for today. He's coming from Syracuse, New York, and he is going to be presenting on leadership lessons from neuroscience. So without further ado, I will turn it over to Dr. Scott Vinciguerra.
Well, good afternoon, and thank you, Carolyn. I'm hopeful that you all can hear me just about perfectly. I'm wearing a headset with a microphone, and that should diminish or dampen some of the background noise in my office. I have a tendency to have, with the air conditioning system, the HVAC system, some feedback from time to time. So please let us know if you're not hearing well. And thank you again for taking the time to explore this topic of leadership within the construct and context of neuroscience. This is a topic that I am extremely passionate about, and I find it fascinating that we can take brain science and apply it to leadership. And over the last maybe 10 to 15 years, this field of neuro leadership has grown substantially to the point now where there are specific institutes throughout the United States and the world that are exploring ways that leaders can improve their skill set and their breadth of leadership knowledge and skills by understanding just a little bit more about how we operate as human beings. So before we get too deeply into it, what are we going to do today? Well, we're going to talk about these bulleted points. And so what does this weird science have to do with leadership? Well, it has to do a lot with peak performance. When we think a little bit more critically of the work that we have to do from a day-to-day basis, I wonder how much time we're putting into figuring out where our optimal environments exist and where's our peak times where we're really going to be doing some dynamic work versus some other times that we're just simply on how we're built. It's not probably going to liken itself to getting the best work and the most optimal work out of us. We'll talk about the importance of regulating your emotions, this idea about emotional intelligence. And Daniel Goleman's work from many years ago now speaks to that, and having a breadth of skills within the framework of emotional intelligence, and it is a skill set that any successful leader should embrace. We'll talk about the importance of recognizing this idea of discipline and how do we go about sharpening our focus. And we have to consider the ways that we remain disciplined in our day-to-day work and what it's going to take to remain disciplined in that work. We'll talk about the importance that is very much linked to that is our habits. What are the things that we have a tendency to go to? And we know that the brain is always going to go to the path of least resistance. So how are we doing the work that we need to do as leaders to offer kind of a detour from time to time for our brain to explore a new path? We'll talk about the idea of thriving on diversity. There's a beautiful African proverb that I refer to that speaks to this, and it's when the music changes, so does the dance. And in leadership, dance is always changing. And if you can only dance one number, then you're probably going to only dance with a few folks. But if you can dance many dances, then perhaps you'll be able to have a greater influence in your dancing. So cultivating trust. What are we doing to build capacity in the roles that we have in cultivating trust amongst a group of people? And then what is it going to take for us to develop our dream team so that we can maximize our potential and the potential of other people? So before we get so deep into this, Carolyn, do you have some questions, some polling questions?
I do, but I'm going to ask if you can push your microphone down a little further away from your mouth.
Okay.
I think it might work a little bit better.
How is this? Is this a little bit better?
I think that's good.
Okay.
Good. All right. We do have some polling questions, so let me pull those up for the group.
And understand, folks, we want this to be as interactive as possible. So keep the questions flowing. Just because there's an agenda doesn't mean that I necessarily have to stick to every single bit of it. So keep the information and questions. So with this, if you could just simply answer these questions.
Great, and I can see we have 43 people logged in and about half of you have answered, so we'll leave it open for another minute or so. We want everybody to vote. Do you know the time of day when you're most likely to do your best work? Yes, no, or sometimes? Okay, keep those votes coming. Okay.
Okay.
Can you see the results?
I can.
Great.
So when you think about when you're going to be doing the best work, are you the traditional, are you a morning person? Are you an afternoon person? I think when we're invested in higher ed, we are an all day type of person because the work is never done. And figuring out how is it that we go about the work that we're doing and giving it our best shot, and what time of day we need to do that best work is extremely important, because it will help to it'll help you to make more informed decisions, the best decisions that you can make, particularly under duress. But more important than that, it's going to give you a sense of habit, and that habit will produce things over time to produce the best work for you. If you're unsure where your best times are, hopefully by the end of our time together today, you'll have an opportunity to go back to the world that you have around you and explore some things with regard to that, to say, geez, I probably need to be doing some of this type of work in the morning, or maybe right before lunch until right about after lunch. That's my peak time of day. So be mindful of that. And it's great that most, 78% of the respondents, 25 people, that's substantial. So good on you for that. All right, next question.
Good, yeah, no, I just wanted to add, Scott, and I know you want some interactivity, so I welcome other people to share comments as well, but I've been a part of teams where people have a really good insight into when their colleagues work best, and they schedule meetings around them, and that's really great. So if you're doing that, if you're aware and you talk to your coworkers and ask them what they prefer, it goes a long way. Let's see here. I'm going to pull up the second question here. And you should be able to answer this. Do you have a disciplined routine of habits that support your success? All right, if you haven't cast your vote yet, please do that. We're going to close the poll in just a moment. Okay, we've got about 80% of you, so I'm going to share the results here.
Right. So just about 50-50 on that, yeah. So this is a question that traditionally we struggle with as human beings, because again, the brain is always going to go to the path of least resistance. Just about a month ago, we all celebrated this new year. And if you're kind of an individual who decides that you want to make a New Year's resolution, usually right about now, that resolution has waned, and your enthusiasm for it has waned. Maybe even a support that you thought was going to be there has waned. So you have to be self-disciplined in order to create a habit that is going to support your success. And for as many mentors as we love to be able to have in our life and leadership, it starts with us. We have to be disciplined enough in our own habits so that those habits become a new normal for us. So if you made a resolution in the beginning of the year to do something, whether it was to exercise more or be more mindful, that really begins with you. And I'll talk a little bit later about the importance of personal accountability and holding yourself accountable to the work that you do. But really, if you're struggling with having a disciplined routine, what I'm hopeful that you're going to get out of this time today is that you'll have a greater understanding of why you do what you do when you do it. I used to be a basketball coach, and I coached everything from the varsity, modified to the varsity, and I was a head coach of a men's professional basketball team overseas. And we never really had any team rules, but the one thing that was a non-negotiable was our discipline. And we define discipline as doing what you're supposed to do when you're supposed to do it, as well as you can do it, and doing it that way every single time. So if that becomes your platform, it becomes very easy to see, am I doing what I'm supposed to be doing, when I'm supposed to be doing it, as well as I'm supposed to be doing it? Am I doing it that way every single time? That level of attention to detail is what really begins to separate some folks in leadership from others. All right, Carolyn, thank you.
Sure. Would you like the third poll?
I would certainly like the third poll.
Okay, here it is. Do you spend time consciously thinking about what has to be done around you?
Right. So what I mean by this is, are you kind of going through the motions, or is it just like a conveyor belt? Or are you purposefully thinking, okay, I've got to take care of these tasks first. This is a priority versus something else that, okay, this can wait a little bit.
Okay, many votes are cast, but we'll just give it another 15 seconds or so. Get your vote in. Okay.
Okay, great. So what the important part of this data, particularly, according to the brain, our unconscious mind, really rules the day. So we need to, if you can think of your brain sort of like a radar screen and making a choice to determine what's going to be put on your radar, there has to be some semblance or identification of arousal for you to give it attention. And because our brains are competing constantly for attention, it's important that we have an conscious understanding of what's happening, in spite of the unconscious thoughts, feelings that we might have that are blended along with it. We might desire to go and get, an extra cup of coffee, where our body might be sensing it, we want it. But we know that could be a trigger, it could be a distraction, because there might be too many things out there that are going to derail us from getting back to our office and doing the work that we need to do. So it's those types of decision making, hundreds of those things in the course of a day that will help to keep you on track and keep you disciplined so that you can do the best work you can possibly do. All right.
Great. And we have a fourth and final poll that we'll ask you to cast a vote on. Do you treat your workplace, your office or cubicle, like a laboratory for innovation and creativity? Do you give it any thought? Yes, no, sometimes. Ooh, ignore my typo there, sometimes.
I'm only seeing poll number 3, Carolyn.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, we've got 75% of our votes cast. If you haven't cast your vote yet, please do that now. Here you are.
Okay, super. So I get a lot of pushback when I ask this question, Scott, in the work that I perform, it's really kind of laid out for me. There's not a whole bunch of creativity or innovation that's part of it. And I might push back and say, okay, well, there's a nanosecond that exists right before you put that foot in your office, and you can make a determination of, could this form use a little bit of revision? Might we take this idea and move it a little further along the line in order to better the student services, for example? I don't believe that it's just up to the leaders to bring creativity and innovation to the workplace. I believe it's everybody's responsibility. Some folks are a little more bent towards that, and some folks like to stay in their lane a little bit more. But if you can consider that your cubicle, your office, kind of like a laboratory for innovation, creativity, and possibility, you might pull back a lens that you have not looked through before and see things in a uniquely different way. Each one of us are built really uniquely different. So we have to take the skill sets that we have and polish them up, and then take a look and see what other things we have that aren't so prevalent, but we really would like to have that as part of it. So if innovation or creativity is one of those areas, you have the flexibility to be creative and innovative, and trust in the fact that, you know, this idea within an environment that is, you know, supportive and safe, at least, you have the ability to hopefully go to a colleague or an immediate supervisor and talk about ways that you could use your workplace as a space for exploration that way.
Scott, I want to push the group a little bit here, because the data is showing us that we might need to make the case about how they can make some changes in the physical environment, the physical space that they work in.
Right.
So just wondering, you know, the people who did say yes, you know, we do have 26% who said yes, they do. So what are some of the things that you're doing, are some ideas that you might be able to change your environment a little bit to sort of draw other people out or encourage yourself to think creatively?
You're asking that of the group, correct?
I am asking it of the group. So what I'm going to do is make sure everyone is unmuted, or if you want to raise your hand and ask me to unmute you, or feel free to use the chat feature. But I do want to hear from you to get some ideas about this. All right, Scott, it looks like everybody's feeling a little shy today. So I don't know if there are some suggestions that you have for them, but I think we do have to convince the group a little bit that these are things that they can do in their environment. So what ideas do you have for us?
Right. So the first idea that I have is change it up. Just simply change it up. And whatever that means, and it doesn't have to be complex. It could be very basic, very simple. Some things about, you know, how is your desk organized? What do you have around you? I used to, this is going to sound a little crazy, right? But I used to keep a large stainless steel ladle in my office. And that was an artifact from my family. And it was an artifact that reminded me, it was my grandmother's ladle. And we, you know, as a child, I was always in the kitchen with her. And when she passed, I kept that. And she used to always say, you know, every recipe that you have is never going to be exactly the same. So go out there and create. Find a way to be creative. Even though it's somebody else's recipe card, it's your responsibility to make it taste a certain way. So, you know, figure out what has to be your ladle. I really, and I would look at that from time to time and I would say, okay, think outside the box. What's got to be done here? Again, it wasn't complex, but it was a constant reminder. So those are the types of things. So what other stories? Come on, there's got to be some creative folks out there. Share your ideas. Okay.
Well,
hopefully we're going to get.
Carolyn, there's comments in the chat pod. Can you see those?
It wasn't blinking at me. I'm sorry, I didn't notice it. Let's see here. Our group has bi-monthly meetings to talk about process improvement, and we toss ideas around. When considering my work, I try to create lines of files and tasks to form queues of work ordered by priority. This helps visually remind me of what has to come next. I bounce ideas off students who work in the department. They seem to have a very fresh perspective. And we're still getting some comments in here. Depending on the problem presented, we will call together the group to brainstorm everything from forms to processes.
Excellent. Yeah, the students are the tip of the spear on that.
Oh, they're still coming in here. Thanks, folks. Let's see. We've been going into basic science laboratories to get to know our faculty, especially on the research ideas, which many times allows my office to think of different scenarios in which we can tailor our approach to assisting. Oh, that's great. I also put a lot of thought into process improvement and experiment on a limited basis to test the concept. Good.
Great.
Great. Well, I think I wanted to make sure we made the case here that there are benefits to this and just thinking about your physical space. I do that in my office too. Scott, you've got a great story about your ladle. I keep posted a ancient proverb that was shared with me at a conference that I went to and had a big impact on me. So I always keep it no matter what office space I'm in. It's visually there for me to be reminded of. So I'm glad to hear that other people are putting thought into their physical environment. I think it makes a big difference in the mindset you approach your work in every day.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, folks. Those are great examples. Any other examples, Carolyn?
No.
Okay. So we can continue on with the slide deck. Do I have control of the slides, Carolyn?
You do. If you can't find the button to click, you can use your arrow.
Yeah, it's
there. Okay, a couple of questions.
okay. All right, so some language to get familiar with. I don't know, Carolyn, these arrows, these blue arrows just came in from nowhere. Are you seeing them or no?
I do.
I don't know.
All right, I'll try to work on that. But at least your slides work, so that's good.
Right.
And in the meantime, you got another comment in the chat. So Melissa says, I make a point to work out on a regular basis and use the stretching and cool down to reflect on work and priorities. Someone says that's a great time to reflect. Do you work out on lunch or before work? I wonder if time of day helps with brainstorming.
Right. Well, we are going to get to the importance of exercise in a little bit, but does it help? Most definitely. But again, it's going to be dependent upon the type of person that you are. Some folks like to get up really early, get to their office, and then at the end of the day do their workout. And that's when they do some really reflective thinking. Some folks are different. They like to get up really early, do the workout, and then go to the office. So in either case, the exercise is useful and helpful for sure. But some language with regard to the brain. The prefrontal cortex is the county seat for problem solving and critical thinking. That's just on the other side of your forehead. And then the other lobes of the brain, the parietal, temporal, occipital lobe in the back of your head, they all have their own unique functions. But for our time together today, we'll be talking about the amygdala, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus, which are considered subcortical structures. They're beneath what's considered there in those colored areas, the cortex. And they work together because they are the emotional centers of our brains. And what happens is the challenge is that, under duress, we have a tendency to shut down the prefrontal cortex. And in a moment where we might need to do some really critical thinking and problem solving, that part of our brain becomes overtaken because the emotional centers of our brain are so strong. They were much earlier in the development of the brain. The brain, if you could kind of think of a flower with a stem and then growing out, the out part is the cortex, and the inner parts, the stem, brain stem in this case, are much older and they're much more refined. The primary communicative cell in the brain is called a neuron. And we have about 100 billion of these neurons at birth. And do we lose some? Well, of course, over time. But the brain is an incredible organ, and it has the ability to reinvent itself through this thing called neuroplasticity. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So we'll also talk about this idea of what is a synapse. And a synapse, that's really where the learning occurs, and where we go about making stronger connections with the world around us. So let's talk about a little bit the difference between managing and leading, because as I mentioned earlier, the brain is kind of waiting for this stimulus in order to respond. And if you consciously tell it to do something, it's likely going to do that, but it has a couple of exceptions. One of those exceptions is when danger looms. Safety is at risk, and I'm not talking the type of OSHA safety here. I'm talking about the safety that it takes for you to have healthy, functional relationships with colleagues. You cannot go to them particular concern if you think they're going to respond in a way that's going to make you feel not worthy or less than or something other than a positive, and you tend to retreat. You'll also have some hesitancy when things are new or unfamiliar, because your confidence wanes in that area. Also, kind of retreat a little bit when there's some the risk is just too much for the reward. If the gamble is too much, you'll kind of again stay in your lane. And when the outcomes, are unpredictable, or when self-efficacy is absent, your inability to believe that you could actually overcome a challenge, that's where again you'll see folks retreat. Managers have a tendency to handle things in a very task-oriented way, and if there's a checklist of things to be done, regardless of who is responsible, they're going to push forward to get that checklist done. And leaders will examine the checklist and say, okay, who is responsible for this, and in what ways are we getting them the support they need in order to earn that check on that particular day? So understanding, and this is not a knock on managers, it's a different style. So can managers be leaders? They can, but a manager from the brain's perspective is just kind of this task-oriented thing. We see the task list and we go about checking it off. So leading yourself. Go ahead.
I just want to give you a heads up that there was a moment there on that last slide where your sound was cutting in and out a little bit. It got better by the end, but I don't know if there's a position or if it's falling down. Just wanted to bring your attention to that a little bit.
Okay. Is this a little bit better?
I think so. It sounds louder.
Sounds louder?
Yeah.
Okay. So leading yourself and others towards reaching peak performance. As I mentioned earlier, it all depends on what you decide to put on your radar, what you're going to be paying attention to. And one person's peak is going to be another person's poison. Different people are motivated and stimulated uniquely. So the goal here is to match your environment to your personal performance. And in athletics, we might refer to this as finding your sweet spot. For a tennis player, it's in the middle of the racket. It's the last third of the bat. For a golfer, right in the dead center of the middle. For a baseball player, rather, and for a golfer, it's smack in the middle of the club. So, how do we as leaders identify our peak performance environment, and then how do we identify the peak performance environment of others? And I had heard earlier through a comment that we get together as a team when we have a tendency and we know when we can do our best work. So I'm going to ask the group again, and you can either contribute through typing a response, but you could also contribute by simply unmuting and sharing, what do you do to identify your peak performance environment? And then what do you do to identify the peak performance environment for the people around you? And the floor is open.
All right. Sorry to bug you again about the microphone, Scott, but now I think it's a little too close. We're getting some popping noises. We need the sweet spot.
Right, we do. I need to find a sweet spot in the microphone.
So the question is open to the group. So I just, I can monitor the chat. If you want me to unmute you, I'm happy to do that. Or feel free to send those messages in through the chat again. I don't know about anyone else. There's a comment here, but I think I'm still looking for my peak performance environment. Let's see here. Honestly, we need to meet when everyone is available, and we don't always have the luxury of meeting during a preferred time for everyone. However, if we were looking to book something way out in the future, we could find an optimum time. It's just not always realistic. Mm-hmm. Another comment for me, I find that getting started, tackling a few, perhaps smaller tasks, helps me to perform more efficiently. For me, it is a process of elimination. If I'm working on something and can't focus on a complex matter, I switch to a smaller, less complex matter. Good. What do they call that? Low-hanging fruit?
Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. Cross something off that list. Right. Get the positive vibes flowing so you've got some confidence to enter into the more complex things and clear your plate a little bit. Mm-hmm. I did hear once to do the hardest task of the day first, and I think that's helpful. Then you don't dread it and can feel accomplished earlier in the day. Good. I peak best under crisis or tight deadlines. Yeah. I'm much more, oh, okay. Oh, there is another similar comment. I'm much more efficient under a bit of pressure, so peak performance is typically during grant deadlines.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I think peak performance evolves over time, and you have to be sensitive to changes in yourself and your work to adjust accordingly. I know this sounds funny, but I think my peak performance is on Friday afternoons because my to-do list has been sitting in front of me all week, and I want to make sure that I enjoy my weekend and cross a few more things off. So right before the end of the week.
Okay. Other comments?
Oh, there is one that I missed here, Emily. I noticed that regardless of when I complete work, having periods for deep work, in quotes, is a bit more important for my peak performance. And I know that's a big topic. That's the book they're reading right now for the Association for Talent Development is on deep work. So I think it's a term that people are using now. Someone just agrees with Jennifer that says the right amount of stress or pressure equals peak performance for her. First hour or two of the day as nice and quiet with no interruptions.
Excellent.
Good. Well, thanks for sharing.
So for the folks that had, and I can't see Carolyn, but there was a comment in there about it kind of depends on the day,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah, and I think that's spot on. And particularly if you are taking over a new responsibility, you're kind of, discovering what is going to be the new normal for you. You're figuring out what the rules are, and you're discovering things along the way. That takes time. But once you have gotten on that bicycle, 2, 3, 4 times, you can anticipate some things, and that will expedite your ability to get things done. And I think you're the individual who said, we're constantly evolving towards that, is also spot on, because we're human beings, like we're not robots. So on one particular day of one particular week, you just might be having a bad day. And that really, really difficult thing that you want to get done, that you have to get done, you don't want to let it go till Friday and it's Tuesday at 11 a.m. You kind of put off, but there are days where you just kind of got to get a few more of those little things done in order to build up the momentum that you need to get through that really difficult thing. So I think that there's some reasonable and some rational flux that happens there, but understanding where your tendencies are is extremely important, and being able to not just get the work done, but do it to your best ability. So a lot of the data that I'll be sharing with you is from a text called The Leading Brain, and I'll share a little bit more about it at the end. But a new book out this past year that talks in depth about peak performance environments, and one of the things that the authors mention in the book is this mindset for success, and I refer to this as the drum roll to regulate your emotions. Oh, can you still hear me okay?
Oh yeah, we can hear you. It's perfect.
Okay, great. So one of the ideas is that the head and the heart are competing. So that PFC is a prefrontal cortex. That's, again, the executive function, the critical thinking and problem solving. The limbic system. That's your emotional center. They're in constant competition for your attention. And although that prefrontal cortex is going to be kind of the maestro that's modulating all the things that are happening around you, the limbic system is trying to keep you alive and safe. And I don't know if some folks had an opportunity to see the infograph or read the article that SUNY Sale has up on their website, but it's a tug of war that's happening constantly, and it's sometimes it could be conscious and sometimes it could be unconscious. But head and the heart are completely part of this whole idea about neuroscience and leadership. And when it comes to the next bullet about threat and reward, in threat, if you feel threatened, your prefrontal cortex is going to shut down and your emotions are going to take over, because if you look back 100, 200, 300,000, 400,000 years, 50 million years, why are we the only species that's still here? We weren't the biggest, we weren't the fastest, we weren't the strongest, but we were the smartest. So we figured out how to survive and adapt. And one of the things that our brains over generations, hundreds of generations, have grown to do is adapt and be nimble. And same can be held true for leaders. When leaders can adapt and they can be nimble, they seem to be successful. And I don't know, Carolyn, when you want to put up that whole safety and threats pieces.
Oh, sure, I can do that. Let me share my screen. Okay. Can you see that? Safety and threats?
Okay. So this is going to be another interactive piece. And what I'd like folks to do is just to simply type a word or a word phrase that might go into, let's start with threats. Now we're going to compare these two circles, and in the end, you'll see how this whole thing comes to play. But let's say that you're part of an organization, and in that organization, there were threats. So a threat might be to the organization is that there is dishonesty amongst the people that are working there. So that would be a word you would type in, dishonest or dishonesty. It could be backbiting. All right. So what I'd like you to do now is kind of give Carolyn a battery of words that could be put in that circle for threats.
And feel free to chat it, or if you'd like us to unmute you, you can speak.
No, I see mistrust there, Carolyn. Yeah.
Mistrust. Okay.
Oh, disrespect. Yep. You're doing awesome, folks. Prejudice. Yeah. Uh-huh. bully.
They're coming in fast and furious now. I'm
They
trying to keep up. Laziness, okay.
Laziness, yeah.
If I missed any, Scott, let me know.
Okay. Inability to think outside the box. Lack of support. Lack of accountability. Yep. We've got ego up there, but we're going to hold off on ego for right now because that's going to be an important part to this later on. Apathy, yeah, for sure, and that'll be the last one, Carolyn. That we'll put there. Okay, so it's an extraordinary list of examples of what it would mean to work, live, or perhaps even lead a threatening environment. So now we're going to do the same thing for safety, and again, you'll submit your responses to Carolyn. And do me a favor though, but don't just say the opposite of what's in the blue part there. So yeah, we want to add the word trust in there right out of the gate. But what are the other things that make it safe? So think about your personal relationships. What is it that makes you gravitate or align with other people? They're welcoming, strong communication, great teamwork. They're kind, they're compassionate. Yeah. Security, definitely. Appreciative. Mm-hmm. Loyal, yeah. Gratitude, yeah. Empowering, super. Great list. Okay.
If I missed some, I'm sorry. We filled up the safe circle here.
Generous, yeah. People are generous with each other, sure. And they don't make you feel bad about it, right? Okay. So I'll ask this question a couple of times, but given the opportunity to work, live, or lead in one of these organizations, I don't know if you want to raise your hand if you'd rather be in the world of safety or in the world of threats. So maybe just write S or T, or you can type in safety or type in threats. S, right? Flowing in. Okay. Now, there's a disclaimer to this, right? So there are folks that will say T or they'll say threats, and I'll ask the question, why? And they'll say that they want to take the folks that might be in there and move them over to safety. And the pushback on that is not everybody has a threshold to be in a functional, safe environment that way. That takes time. If they've been in a world of dysfunction, I refer to it as the dysfunction junction. If they've been there for a really long time, it could be really challenging for them to transfer into a healthy, safe environment because their normal is not healthy or safe or loyal or appreciative or generous in any way. Okay, Carolyn, so I'm going to go back to the slides. Can you create, how we do at the workshop, can you create 2 outer circles around each one?
2 outer circles, okay.
Yeah. Maybe while you're doing that, I'll just continue on with the slide deck.
Sure. Do you know how to share it again? You have to.
Oh, it's up to me? Okay.
Yeah.
Share. I clicked on share. Yes. And okay.
Okay.
All right. So what are the other mindsets for success? This idea about being emotionally resilient. We know that eating well, sleeping well, drinking lots of healthy fluids are also going to be part of that drum roll. Showing appreciation. According to the authors of this text, taking time to simply be grateful can increase baseline happiness by about 25%. Second to the last bullet I refer to is cognitive jujitsu. Sometimes you have to you have to create a problem and then use your strengths to your advantage. And then as we all have experienced, right? We get lemons and we have to make them in a lemonade. How we go about approaching the resolution to that makes all the difference in the world. With regard to sharpening your focus, the executive function, again, that prefrontal cortex can rule the day, absolutely, in leadership. But it's an imperfect area, the prefrontal cortex, because it's driven to distraction. So when we think about this idea of multitasking, we say, well, I can do that really well, and I can do this at the same time. The problem is they're really, the researchers now know that multitasking it's really a misnomer. You can't do one thing to your ultimate potential and simultaneously do something else. You can't do it. So the idea is that we have to, if we're going to try to multitask, we are going to be sabotaging and sacrificing both things, or all three, or all seven things we're trying to get done at the same time. Particularly when you're focusing or working through a crisis and it's time heavy or time deadline, we have to focus in on this specific aspect or element of the problem, and then we have to move on to the next. But we have to have an understanding, a bigger picture of what we're trying to achieve. It's very important that if you're going to be in that space, that you have consistently prepared yourself. And one of the ways that you can do that is by always working to clear your mind. And one of the ways that you can work to clear your mind is to clear your desk. If that cubicle or office of yours, it looks chaotic, and you say, these are distractions that are all over the place, it's very difficult for you to remain focused. And those are the types of things that are likely to derail your focus as you continue on. The idea of practicing mindfulness to increase focus and improve your abilities. Each of us need time to decompress, and we go about decompressing in unique ways. But if you can think about your breathing, thinking about relaxing, even just 5 minutes a day. There are folks that, Scott, I did it for 5 minutes in the morning, and I was doing it, 5 minutes in the afternoon. It really helped me. But not everybody is, again, that might not be for you. But it is important. The pinnacle of performance is flow. This was something that came up about 15 years ago, this idea of flow. We can kind of just get in a zone of performance. It initially came out of work that was done with athletes, and they were performing at a level that was so consistent and so much further above all of the rest of the competition. What did it take to get there? So for them, it was a level of concentration, most certainly a level of discipline, most certainly a level of commitment. These are all things that when we talk about leadership are the same types of things. So when you've practiced clearing out your mind, and you practice some things about mindfulness, and you've practiced some things about recognizing how you get through crisis, you're prepared for it. In coaching, we say, we need you to be ready. That's not good enough. We need you to be ready already, so that when the crisis comes, we know how to respond. We're not going to be caught off by it. So how can we as leaders sharpen our focus, anticipate our distractions, and cull away the excess? One of the things we might do is delegate and find our zone. And then this is, I'm throwing it back to you now for your responses. So type in, Carolyn, off we will go. Sharpening your focus. How can we as leaders sharpen our focus, or anticipate our distractions, or cull away the excess, or find our zone? What are you folks doing in these areas? So let us know. The floor is open.
Good. It looks like, so just a reminder about the audience here, Scott. So not everyone here is a leader, but I do still think this is important for us to think about our flow. if we want to reach that peak performance. So someone says, stay organized.
Mhm.
I'm old school with a paper to-do list. When I start getting distracted from tasks at hand, my list reminds me to get back on track. Someone else says cross-training the staff in my office, helping with multitasking issues you've mentioned. Another shares that they minimize interruptions. Communicate clearly to staff. As a leader, I think you need to realize that you can't do it all. So hiring the appropriate staff who have specific skills to help you can help you achieve your goals.
We are going to address that for sure.
Same here, says Melissa, good old-fashioned to-do list, just something about being able to cross items off.
Right.
Learning to delegate more and training someone else at the same time to be able to serve as backup.
Excellent.
I think we haven't really talked about cultures that have a lot of meetings, but I know in that environment it can be important to carve out time on your calendar to make sure you have that time for yourself to focus if you have a big project or something that really is going to require more than just an hour of your time to focus on.
And you've likely found out that the higher you get up in the food chain of your organization, the more demands you have of your time.
Let's see here. We've got some more comments coming in. Organize more difficult to-dos in the morning when least distracted. Someone else shares that they help staff create their own goals that mesh with the strategic plan of the organization.
Excellent.
And this one gets an exclamation point. Prioritize. Saying no to meetings when I can. Good.
All right.
Well, thank you all for sharing. Yeah, if we can do just a little bit more of this, I think you'll find yourself able to cross off some of those to-dos.
Mm-hmm. So these authors and researchers developed this curve. You've likely seen it before. The idea is that we're hopefully in that yellow zone where we're kind of feeling the good stress, the eustress, but we're not hitting the peak of it. At the same time, we're not in the green zone where we're not feeling, we're kind of putting our feet up and not being useful to our organizations. Clearly want to avoid the area in red. That's where folks just, they're done. They've checked out. And we know that if we bring them to that brink of fatigue and exhaustion, the slope is only going one way. It's very difficult to bring them back. So if your performance is in that yellow area, we don't want you to be totally fatigued, but maybe there's a good stress in there. The regular types of stress that we all talk about, it's not healthy either. So we have to find where the balance is going to be so that we can perform the way that we do at a stress level that's going to be optimum for us, but not overloaded. I mentioned this idea earlier about this neuroplasticity and reinventing yourself. I'd kind of like you to bring yourself back to when you tried something new for the very first time. It could be when you're riding a bicycle, or even you were playing tennis for the first time or playing golf. But you were learning a system. And if we were to take a walk together up that mountain of the image on your left, we would follow that path because it's pretty simple how to get up the mountain. But if those paths weren't there, we would have to figure out a way to get there efficiently together. And that's what the brain does. It discovers something new and unfamiliar, and it has to identify the pathway in order to get there. But it has to have had practice. And the image on the right shows this, the plane flying in kind of all these positions. wildly inefficient. But at the same time, they're still learning how to navigate the controls. The more that folks understand that, we're really trying to lay the groundwork for the brain to reinvent itself, that will get more efficient at it over time, the stronger the brain is going to get. And to give you an example of the power of the human brain, with regard to it reinventing itself, I spoke. These are just kind of basic things. Going for a walk up a hill or something like that. Flying an airplane is a lot more complex. But there was a neuroscientist many years ago now, 20 years ago, Ben Carson, who has since left medicine and gone into housing and urban development. But he performed the first hemispherectomy. And the image that you might have of the brain having two hemispheres was a condition. There was a condition the young girl had called Rasmussen syndrome, which caused major seizures, grand mal seizures, consistently, and there's no medication for it. The only resolution was to remove the impacted part of the brain, and he performed that surgery, removed half of her brain, and now the brain is only left with its half, and its partner is gone, and the brain now has to recircuit itself. And within 2 weeks, that young lady, 9-10-year-old girl, walked out of the hospital with half of a brain. Now, did she walk out, moonwalking all the way? No, but she was able to ambulate. She was, maybe walking with a little bit of a limp. And over time, and with the right interventions and types of therapies, the brain kind of said, "Oh, I don't have my partner anymore. How am I going to work with myself in order to get things done?" That's the power of the brain. So, if the brain can do that, the brain can certainly get us up that mountain, on the image on that left, to reinvent a new and creative pathway for success. And how it does that is through the magic of the neuron. In the upper right-hand corner, you see a little circle of this image here, and that's the synapse. That's where learning occurs. And a dendrite hooks up with an axon and exchanges chemicals, and messages are sent and received. In the middle of the image, you see that red area, and that is called the myelin sheath. And in the beginning, when you do something brand new for the first time, the myelin isn't very well laid down. It's not very strong. Over time and with performance improvement, that gets stronger, and the effort that it takes for the messages to get sent from one neuron to the next, from the axon to the dendrite, get easier. And over time, that myelin becomes like a conduit, and all of a sudden, think about when you tried to whistle the first time and you couldn't do it, and the muscles that would have to contract, and how your tongue is formed, and how you put your lips together, and how much air you have to breathe through. Something as basic as whistling took practice, but you don't think about having to do that today. All of these minor things lead up to something very, substantially major. When, maybe you're 9, 10, 11 months old, you began to walk. Maybe a year-old began to walk. Now you have the spatial awareness around you. Those are neurons firing constantly and working to strengthen each other so that you don't fall and hit your head. So with the magic of the neuron and the idea that we can create new habits and create new pathways, as I mentioned a couple times already, the brain prefers the path of least resistance. So you must convince the brain that the effort is going to be clearly worth it. And when you think about your habits, and if those of you in leadership roles, your leadership habits, those of you outside of leadership roles and the habits that you have, how do your goals help to change the habits? Well, goals will help to change habits when accountability is present. That's for sure. If there isn't an accountability system linked directly to your goal, and your developmental goals and action plans don't have a way, there's no mechanism by which you can be held accountable, then the goals really are kind of nefarious. They don't really they don't hold any weight because there's no accountability towards them. So what's in it for me? If we don't have an emotional horse in the race, we are really unlikely to change. We know that learning is emotional. All we have to realize is that when we are on a path and we struggle with something, and then something novel happens, we have a connection to it, and it's likely some level of emotional connection, then we're paying attention again. But we have to understand what our triggers are, and in knowing what our triggers are, we can build sustainable habits so that we don't get sidelined by our environment. And then, this if then, and if this happens, then this is going to happen, or when this happens, this is going to happen. We kind of work to plan for that. And what folks could do, it's sort of, again, this is kind of like a survival mechanism in many ways. We're thinking through it and saying, okay, if this happens, I've got to react or respond in this way. This is going to make the most sense. It's going to be the greatest benefit to our students. But if I'm new to this and I haven't done this a lot, I'm going to make some mistakes. So if you are just brand new to your work, or you're in the space of leading others, you have to give the beginners the time that they need to mature with the experiences that they have exposure to. And all of these things combined help an individual to reach their peak performance and reach their potential. If they don't feel safe, that circle that you filled out earlier, if they don't feel it's safe, to come to you with a question, if they feel as though the question that you bring is going to in some way deflate them, then they're unlikely to branch out. And that really, that's a shame. That's a shame when that happens, because what potential are we missing with that individual, and what could we be doing for that individual to bring out the best in them? So how do we go about fostering healthy leadership environments? Well, we can do this, as I mentioned earlier. This is an emotional process, and so too is learning to lead. This is also the hippocampus test. So the hippocampus test is short-term memory type stuff. But when we go to bed at night, in the third bullet, we take that information, and anything that we've deemed worthy of retaining is transferred from short-term to long-term memory. And there's no one place for memory in our brain. It's distributed across the cortex, that outer area of our brain. So by far, we know that the strongest form of learning comes from negative experiences. So if we're going to use aversive techniques to learning, we have to do it very, very carefully. I go through this exercise when I'm doing a lot of these not one-on-ones, but face-to-face. And in elementary school in third grade, I had a nun who, every day was very disciplined. And this is the early 1970s, and there wasn't a lot of collaboration happening in the classroom. You had to recite the Presidents of the United States in order every single day. And I can still do that same exercise as though, she was standing right here. And that's been over 40 years. And the primary reason that I can do that is because of the fear that was instilled in me if I didn't perform. So when we use fear, it will have a short-term impact in a positive way. You might get something done, but it's likely to have very long-term negative impact on, for one thing, relationships. So as you think about what you really want to get out of the folks that you're working with and working for, carefully about your aversive techniques. Lastly, the organization that learns together is going to lead together. I believe that there is unlimited potential in every individual. Anything is possible. And tapping into that potential is the responsibility, not just of the leader, but of your colleagues. I think that we spend so many hours at work in our working life. We have a very finite amount of time to spend reaching our potential and helping others reach theirs. So, Carolyn, if you could go back to your screen now with regard to that whiteboard.
I'm not sure where it's saved. I did save it, but not sure if I'm going to be able to pull that up easily.
Okay.
But Scott, I know everybody, you teased us with your party trick. So I'll try to pull up that screen, but if you want.
While you're pulling that up, I'll give you the party trick. How about that?
All right, sounds good.
Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Adams, Jackson, Van Buren, Harrison, Tyler, Polk, Taylor, Fillmore, Pierce, Buchanan, Lincoln, Johnson, Grant, Hayes, Garfield, Arthur, Cleveland, Harrison, McKinley, Roosevelt, Taft, Wilson, Harding, Coolidge, Hoover, Roosevelt, Truman, Eisenhower, Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, Ford. Stupid.
It's not stupid. Good. So let's see here. I did save it, and I don't know if I can pull it up while the meeting is still in oh, here it is. Good. I got it. Can you see that?
I can.
Good.
So can you put an additional circle around each one of those?
Oh, now you're pushing it. I might be able to. Let's see. Let's draw a line here. So circle around the whole thing?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Great. And then if you could create a circle that has, a circle around safety, you can just draw, take the top of the purple line and draw it to the bottom of the purple line.
Is that right?
Well, one circle around safety, one circle around threat.
Okay.
Great. Okay. So what I asked Carolyn to do is to create an installation system for what's all that language that's on the inside. And when we talk about threats, when we talk about safety, there has to be some things that are non-negotiable that protect our values within each circle, because both of these environments are what's there is a value. If you're working and living in a threatening environment, for example, mistrust is just sort of the rules of engagement. It's just how we get along. Disrespect is how we do it here. Groupthink, don't question. Prejudice, absolutely. This is how we, some folks say this is how we roll here. So if that doesn't work for you, get out. Conversely, there are things that are extremely important to the inner parts of an organization in safety. So for an organization in safety, the things that would protect what's happening on the inside are things like compassion, humility, empathy, selflessness, solace, grace, intention, dignity, courage, and civility. Over on the threatening side, what would protect it, this would be the installation system protecting what's happening on the interior, would be the 7 deadly sins, right? So sloth, envy, lust, all of those things that, would be negative and really detract from folks reaching their potential. So if I'd like you to kind of, keep those images in your head there, because we're going to come back to this one more time. And when we come back to it for the very last time, I'll explain about, what's happening with the brain when we're working in a safe environment versus working in a threatening environment.
Good. Good. If you want to go back to the slides, you can click share. But I saved this image so we can go back.
Great. So, Carolyn, do we have a quiz for this or no?
No, I think you wanted some open-ended questions. So
right.
If you can use the chat, I'll just ask people to add their comments in there.
Right. So this is, again, the floor is open. So just which of these best describes your team? Are they a team of explorers mostly? Are they willing to seek answers and uncover new horizons? Builders? Are they directors? Negotiators? And if there's a combination of the two or maybe three, just put them all in and just make sure that Carolyn gets to them. So the floor is open. Which of these best describes your team? Have at it.
So we're getting a few explorers, 3 explorers, some negotiators, builders and negotiators, a combination, all of the above. Explorers and negotiators, directors, negotiators, explorers, negotiators, combination, builders and negotiators. So we've got a little bit of everything, a smorgasbord.
All right.
A little bit of each.
All right. So if you wrote down explorers and builders, these are the types of folks who exude optimism, right? They excel in creativity, fiercely loyal, dependable in every way. If you've got some folks who are the directors and the negotiators, they're the strategists. They're really critically thinking through things. Very intuitive. But the key to all of it is truly how we go about thinking about our problems and then how we choose to go about solving our problems. You know, having a group of total explorers on a team is great if you have to really get into, you know, delving into those creative and innovative things. But if they're doing it that in a way that doesn't make sense, they could really use the help from some directors and negotiators. And conversely, if you've got a group of directors and negotiators, that can turn into a group think, and then blinders come on and they don't see the possibilities of exploration and building maybe collaboration in front of them. So if we're going to go into working in an environment or leading an environment today and tomorrow, what is our best in class? You know, how do we go about spending time training those with an existing skill set? These authors, the Leading Brain text, recommend that we accentuate the positive, that when dealing with the weakness of a team member, expect small steps. I love this next one. Don't try to teach a pig to fly, hire a bird. Hire the talent that has the skill sets that you already desire, rather than taking somebody and having to train them and hope that it sticks. It's a different approach. So, and you know, one size fits few. Develop others on their strengths. Cultivating trust in your leadership. And when the brain trusts, and it's a trustful environment, trusting environment, that's when we start to see the potential in ourselves and our individuals around us. So when neurons fire together, they engage in an action, and they don't necessarily have to be invested in the action. They could just simply witness it. So when individuals witness, for example, go back to those 2 circles, when individuals witness compassion or dignity or civility, they seem to mirror that behavior. The same is true with prejudice or mistrust or apathy. They seem to mirror that. That's how the brain works, because it's going to go to the path of least resistance. And if you're in a threatening environment, it's very difficult to break out of that and not kind of carve your own niche back into a place of safety. Go back to the slide here. For desiring to have a group of folks following along in a certain way, it's responsible for us to set the example of what's that's going to look like, sound like, and feel like. So always reap a healthy crop based on what we plant. And rewards do drive performance, good, bad, or indifferent. So if we can create a reward state for the organization to eliminate the avoidance behavior, it doesn't have to be cute or complex, but it should count. And it should count for something. So what I'd like to do now is go a little bit more deeply into the chemical influences with regard to the brain. And this will wrap up that whole diagram. So Carolyn, if you want to bring that diagram back up.
Okay. Sorry, it looks a little bit weird here, but you can see it on the bottom of the screen, hopefully.
Mm-hmm. Okay. On the right side above the top of the purple lines there, to the far right, if you could write just the letter E.
Okay. Here?
More to the right, the extreme right.
Okay.
Yeah. E, right. All right, to the left of the letter E, write the word or the letter D. Great. In the middle of the two circles, write the letter C. To the left of the letter C, write the letter S. And to the left of S, the letter O. Okay. If you could follow me along with this, going back to the letter E. E stands for endorphins, D stands for dopamine, C stands for cortisol, S, serotonin, and O, oxytocin. You see them on a continuum this way, and that's because endorphins and dopamine are more likely aligned with threatening environments or where we don't need a lot of other folks other than ourselves to achieve our goals. Cortisol kind of mingles in between the two, and then serotonin and oxytocin are more on the safety and threats, or safety and trust rather, of the spectrum. So as I go through this next piece, you can keep that image in your head. Okay, so the endorphins and dopamine are really about self-preservation, and cortisol is that chemical that we have within us, our brains, where if we're driving down the road and all of a sudden an animal, a deer, pops out in front of us, and we get that, oh my goodness, right? And then it enters our body and it exits very quickly. If it stays around, it becomes very, very unhealthy for us because we feel like a live wire. We kind of feel like we're on edge all the time. Conversely, building relationships, we get that sense of connection to people, and that's that feeling of that serotonin gives us and that oxytocin gives us when we feel that level of connection and trust and empathy with others. So you want to get a little shot of endorphin? Not a problem. Go get some exercise for 20 minutes, and you'll get that. If you want to have a little bit more, or you like it so much, maybe you'll exercise intensely. If you like the pain that comes along with getting a tattoo, even, or you're an adrenaline junkie, these types of folks who are doing this type of stuff, that feeling of it's freeing. It's very just sort of rewarding, and you feel so accomplished just by taking that hit of endorphins that we get from those experiences. So does dopamine. We mentioned earlier this idea of a checklist. I'm a checklist person myself, and to-do list, right? On Saturday morning, we get up and we make that to-do list. And as our day evolves and we stop at the laundromat and we pick up the laundry, or we go get some things at the grocery store, or we stop at the pharmacy and get what we need there. We put that little check mark next to it, we put a little line through it. Some really anal folks will make the square next to the actual item that has to be achieved, and then they'll put a check mark in it. It's very professional. But at the end, every single time we make that check, we make that line through it, we give ourselves a shot of dopamine. And that's a great feeling. And so why do I have the Kardashians up there? Because this is what we get when we binge watch. We get that shot of dopamine. So it could be, for a while, Breaking Bad was the hot thing to watch and binge watch. Whenever we go about binge watching something, we're getting that pleasure, that reward, but it can become addicting. And we lost a beautiful actor because he was so addicted to his lifestyle, and unfortunately his talent is now gone. But you don't need anybody to get your endorphins or dopamine. You don't need anybody. Set your goals and then go achieve them. It doesn't require the relationship of anybody else to get that pleasure and that feeling of reward and that satisfaction. Conversely, and those what I just talked about is on that threat side. So think about individuals who are constantly having those messages and those chemicals sent in their brain of what it's going to mean to survive. Well, if I only can rely on myself, I don't have to rely on other people. I can work to survive, and that's all it becomes. Again, conversely, on safety, we have this idea or this chemical called serotonin, and this is a leadership chemical. This is where we show appreciation and we say thank you. My goodness, without you, I never could have gotten this project across the finish line. It's because of your ideas that you helped me and my team to earn that award, and thank you so much. So when we go about recognition or trust or safety in our work, and when we come together as a team, we have an incredible ability to go about sharing that, mirroring those neurons. Again, neurons will fire when they see things, and we will have a reaction to them to do the same in kind. So if we see that the new normal is compassion, or if we see that the new normal is showing appreciation or gratitude, then the rules of engagement now have been redefined for us. And the last one is the ultimate in chemicals, and I call it the Oprah chemical. It is empathy. It is about relationships. It is about connections. The one thing that we can get a shot of oxytocin on is when we go look somebody in the eye and we go to them, we shake their hand. And that connection, that physical touch, when you pat somebody on the shoulder and say, hey, great job, you both exchange oxytocin that way. So if and researchers now have discovered that witnessing an event of appreciation also gives an individual that shot. And like the other ones, if you witness dysfunction, you're likely to trend in that direction if you see enough of it. Okay, and then that's not broad brushing anything, but if people are going to be accepted into an environment, then they have to play by the rules of engagement. So, Oprah could tell you that you've got to work the holiday and you get to work the holiday, but it's Oprah, so we kind of feel, okay, I got to work the holiday, but that trust that we have in the messages that we send to one another, extremely important. So here's a challenge. We're trying to move, as I mentioned earlier, you might want to move some folks from that threatening environment to a safe environment. And although cortisol does all these things, these bullet points, it does keep us safe. Remember the driving down the road with a deer that comes out. But our stress increases when cortisol is present. Danger is persistent when cortisol doesn't show up to the party by itself. It brings four friends: stress, danger, anxiety, and paranoia. And when these four things combined are working together, chemically, cortisol prevents or inhibits oxytocin from doing the good work that it should be doing. And that's why it's so difficult to bring somebody from a toxic environment over to a healthy environment and expect them to just sort of acclimate. So really pay attention when you're bringing folks on board, or you're doing semblances of onboarding. Ask them those questions. Tell me what it was like to work in the place that you were at before. Give me some insight as to where you think you perform your best. Share with me an example of where you thought you were going to hit the standard and then fell short, and what were the triggers that made you fall short. Did you not get the support that you needed? Was it a funding issue? Ask those questions, because you're trying to peel away the layers of what you need to help folks reach their potential. But if they are so coming from an environment that could be so toxic, and you're expecting them to just simply jump on board with all this healthy, environment stuff, you are gonna struggle, because you're gonna get frustrated. So the brain is an extremely powerful entity, and this is how much environments really truly do matter. This is a PET scan of a brain that's doing some reading. This is a brain imaging technique where they take a breath of radioactive glucose, and they give the individual a task, and then they measure where the activity is in the brain. And the part that's that light blue or teal colored, that prefrontal cortex. So singular task, singular environment. Writing, task where the individual is writing something. Listening. So Wernicke's area, Broca's area, language and speech come in the temporal lobe in this area. But when individuals are put in an environment where they are doing some reading, doing some writing, doing some listening, there's a team thing going on, some critical thinking and problem solving. These are the areas of the brain that come along simultaneously to create greater connections. I don't know about you, but if you have children, I would expect that you would want them to be around a teacher, somebody that's going to give them that type of stimulation throughout their day so that they can access the various parts of their brain. The same thing is true when we come to work. We expect stimulation. We expect to be, doing things and getting into a world where we feel useful. And if we are relegated to a space where we're not feeling useful or feeling our talent isn't being maximized in some way, then we start to roll back and we start to think about what other opportunities are out there elsewhere. So, how do you go about developing your dream team? And again, these are some things that are taken right from the text. You target your developmental efforts. See where you can spend, get the biggest bang for your buck, and don't try to, teach a pig to fly. Create and seek brain-friendly workplaces. Something as really basic as natural light. If you don't have enough natural light, can you maybe move a meeting to a place that brings in some natural light for you? Provide meaningful incentives. Again, it doesn't have to be cute or complex, but it does have to count. Understand that individual rewards are shared by a group, and that social flow is when a group is on social flow and everything is kind of in synergy there and aligned. That's flow on steroids, because there's no telling the potential of that group. And then keep your focus, keep your flexibility, and remember to collaborate all along the way. These are just some of the themes and characteristics that these authors, and I've seen this in action, where you see a group of folks just overperforming, outkicking their coverage, so to speak, in every single way. So here's just a couple of really useful resources for you. The book that I've referred to the entire time, The Leading Brain, Powerful Science-Based Strategies for Achieving Peak Performance. The book in the middle, Carol Dweck's work with how we go about, are we in a mindset of growth, or are we in a fixed mindset? And if we are in a fixed mindset, there's going to be some limitation to what we are going to accept. That's going to be part of a threshold or a continuum, and how we go about doing our work. But another wonderful read, and certainly crucial conversations. Stakes are high, emotions run strong, and opinions vary. We really struggle as human beings. So this book is a useful resource to get by having those crucial conversations, so that you can create the mindset, and then understanding that what you're doing really is about the leading brain. So with that, I'd like to open up the floor to questions, comments, thoughts, ideas.
Great, and I'll unmute the lines here to see if anyone wants to talk, but feel free to continue to chat as well. Okay, the lines are open. If anyone has any questions or comments, anything you'd like to ask Scott. All right, I'm going to mute them and unmute. It looks like Kathleen wants to talk here. Let me just unmute her.
Hi, Kathleen. Welcome.
Let's see here. Hold on. Okay. There we go. It should be open now.
It wasn't me that said anything, but I thought this was excellent, Scott. Really appreciate the time you put into it.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but I didn't have a question. So.
No, oh, I'm sorry. Your video was on and it looked like you were leaning in with your mouth moving. Sorry, I misread the cue.
I was saying, did somebody say something?
We're reading the chat. There's a couple comments in the chat.
Great. Okay. So what are some differences that you've seen in social flow in a corporate environment versus a higher ed setting?
Great question. So can you still hear me okay?
We can.
Okay. So in higher ed, believe it or not, the businesses, and I have my own consulting company, overwhelmingly, the idea of, let's take a mid-sized manufacturer. They're about numbers. They're very rarely are they about people. So that would be the one distinct difference. And I think in higher ed, we really put forth a good foot in trying to align our mission and our vision and our values to what students experience. I think we've gotten better at that over the years. Do I still think we've got some way to go? Of course. But those would be the two areas. You know, if you're working in that environment, in that small to mid-sized manufacturing company, and you know that you've got to get X number of pieces out on the floor by 5 o'clock that day, and you don't do it, you know that you're going to catch what from your boss, without question, because the boss's backside is on the line. I think in higher ed, there's just a little bit different expectation.
Good. There's a comment that this has been very informative and have come away with some great points that can be useful in their environment. Lots of thank yous, and this was excellent, interesting topic. And Scott, before we wrap up, I just wanted to make sure, I know in a lot of our workshops, we'll take some time for people to reflect, and there were so many ideas presented. But taking a minute to just think about the one or two things that people want to do differently or start to incorporate. I mean, you talked about the power of these daily habits, and there was a lot here. But if people want to take a minute before they log off to think about the one or two things they want to commit to, and check back in with yourself, set a reminder in 21 days, have you done it? What does it look like? I think that's really important to get the most out of today's program.
Yeah, and again, I know we had a defined amount of time, and this is something that I could talk about it for weeks. But if you want to take what you've were exposed to today and try to satisfy three areas: satisfy your mind, satisfy your body, satisfy your spirit. What would be under each of those three umbrellas? Put 2 or 3 bullet points. What's going to satisfy your mind? What's going to satisfy your body? What's going to satisfy your spirit? And then you align all 3 of those together, and each day you work. Mm-hmm. The hardest part is taking the first step. So take a step. Mm-hmm. Not run, one step. When I work with athletes, I tell them give them 1% more every day. Just 1%. And on any particular day, you can determine what that 1% looks like, sounds like, and feels like. And if everybody's given just 1% more, where are we going to be in a week or two, in a month, halfway through our season?
Mhm.
Small bites.
Good. And Scott, someone brought up before that this is a mixed group, so not everyone here is a leader.
Yeah.
And so I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts to sort of tie together your environments that we all collectively here laid out. What is an environment of psychological safety? What's an environment of psychological threats? What do you say to the people who are not feeling like they're a leader and have that control over the environment? Are there any things that people can do if they're in that position?
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever worked in an environment where you saw somebody that did not have the status or the title of a leader, but they had the influence?
Mm-hmm.
Be the influence.
Good. We can all do that.
Absolutely. That's why this shouldn't fall exclusively on the shoulders of a leader. Who can lead if you have nobody to lead?
Mm-hmm. Good. So just some more comments from the chat here. Best session yet. Very efficient and organized. Ooh, I like the 1% more. We'll definitely be implementing that. Thank you. Great suggestion.
Well, very kind. Thank you.
And we do have one more question here. You were going to comment on ego. And
oh, yes. Yeah, let's go back to it. Thank you.
Good. So that was that. They just left it open. They wanted to hear about ego.
I'm sorry. So can you go back to that graphic?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I would have remembered this like at 2:00 in the morning, and then I would have went, you didn't finish the last piece of the puzzle.
Can you see it?
I can. Can you bring up the one that had the letters across the top?
Let's see.
Awesome, Carolyn.
Okay.
I don't know how to do this technologically, but I'm going to give you visually 2 thumbs up for rocking this whole graphic stuff today. It's been awesome. All right. So remember the letters that went across the top? Do we have that screen or no?
No, but I can add them quickly.
Okay. So along the right, above threats, it's E. Yep. Endorphins, dopamine, right? C, S, right. Oh, great. All right. Both of these environments have a lifeblood, something that gives it energy. For the one on the left in safety, it's all about service. So when we think about what happens on the innermost part and what we value, it's service. When we go to the threats, it's all about ego. All about ego. What can I get out of it for myself? So you'll hear a lot of language in safety, that things like, how are we going to tackle this problem? In what ways can I support our team in getting this project completed? Conversely, in threats, you'll hear a lot of I, my, and me. So if you're working in the threatening environment and you're hearing a lot of I, my, and me, those are very personal. Conversely, with safety, it's about us, our, and we. Massive difference. So given that information, you have a choice now as to where you want to align yourself with. And you might say, well, Scott, you don't understand my circumstance. I'm stuck in this job. Okay. For right now, in this moment, you are. But what are you doing in your 1% to move away? That's why I said, what are you satisfying in your spirit? What are you satisfying in your body? What are you satisfying in your mind to get you out of that? And if you're committed to it and you're disciplined enough to take that first step, then tomorrow's your first step.
Good. Thank you, Scott.
Yeah.
Any other questions? We still have the chat line open. More compliments coming in. Thank you. That ties it all together. Appreciate your time. Great session.
Thank you.
Good. And I just want to thank you too, Scott. You did a really great job. And I know Scott is fantastic. If you ever get a chance to see him in person at a workshop, his energy is, something that you can't deny. So thank you for stretching yourself professionally and, going forward here with a 2-hour session online. And thank you to the group. All 45 of you are still logged on. So hopefully you found this investment in your time valuable today. And you can find a couple of ideas for you to change a habit tomorrow. So I'm going to turn it over to the RF team.